sort of introduction for Dr. Renee, for those who weren't here yesterday. She spoke yesterday about the suffrage movement in Luxembourg, and Dr. Wagener is a Luxembourgish historian and journalist. She's collaborated on different research projects on Luxembourgish history at the University of Luxembourg, and her research areas being social history of 19th and 20th century Luxembourg, gender history, and emancipation movements. She's worked as a lecturer on oral history at the University of Luxembourg and is now co-commissioner for an exhibition on the 100th anniversary of the introduction of universal suffrage in Luxembourg, organized by the Luxembourgish Parliament and the National Museum for History and Art. And on that note, then I will hand over the presentation to...
Okay, I will speak tonight, or for you it's this afternoon, about Grand Duchess Marie Adelheid and the introduction of women's suffrage in Luxembourg. Before I start, I would like to draw your attention to the biography of Marie Adelheid, which has recently been published. And the author is Josiane Weber, a Luxembourgish historian. And I have some problems here. Okay, it's okay. For those who read German, it is an interesting portrait and also a resume of the political history of Luxembourg in World War I. Okay. Then the structure of my little speech tonight, I will first speak about Marie Adelheid and democracy, then about the constitutional reform, in a third step about the crisis of monarchy, and fourth the referendum of 1919, and then I will try to draw a conclusion. The first point, Marie Adelheid and democracy. Concerning the short reign of Marie Adelheid, I will not go into political detail, but I think one could divide the 7 years of her reign in 3 phases. The first one, after her intronization in 1912, was a kind of political honeymoon, with even liberal politicians giving credit to her, while the socialists retained from broaching the subject of monarchy. The second phase started already in the same year. It was characterized not only by a disruption between her and the Minister of State Paul Eyschen, but also by a growing dissent between her and the parliamentary opposition. The political conflicts continued after Eyschen's death in 1915 and were only superficially softened by Marie Adelheid's more cautious attitude in spring 1918. The third and final phase can be established between the summer of 1918, when several scandals putting the relations of the dynasty with Germany and the Kaiser in the forefront shattered the fragile political slowdown, and the abdication of Marie Adelheid in January 1919. Marie Adelheid, despite being born at the end of the 19th century, was felt to be an autocratic ruler in a time period when in the whole of Europe the role of monarchy was put into question by parliaments who gained in legitimation by a democratization of their rules and by a growing generalization of the vote. At the same time, small monarchic states faced a decline in legitimacy. The end of the war went together with a more fundamental criticism of monarchy. Several empires were dissolved and replaced by republics, and inside the Germany, who had been an empire with many small states, the small monarchies disappeared too. Since the beginning, the criticisms of the liberal and socialist opposition concerned Marie Adelheid's closeness to church and to the Catholic party. The Grand Duchess did not, so they felt, stand above the parties, but her political decisions were influenced by this closeness. For example, when she refused to sign a more liberal bill on school education, or when she did not accept the nomination of liberal personalities to important posts. So this was already directly from the beginning a problem. When war started, the pro-German attitude of Marie Adelheid was added to these criticisms. When, after the death of Paul Eichen, she put in place a Catholic minority government and announced new elections, this was seen by many as an unrightful intrusion into political affairs. Marie Adelheid did not see this in her first years of rule. It is not clear whether she reflected on this, but she was said to rule according to the principle of the régime personnel, meaning personal regime, that she saw the Minister of State as her executive instrument. Later, she did not manage to communicate that she was open to a new, more democratic way of ruling, where monarchy's power would be reframed and reduced to more representative functions. After an important rally by the political opposition in the beginning of 1916, criticizing directly the role of monarchy, I don't know if you can read it here on the slide, it says, "Wir wollen sein ein freies Volk unter einer freien Großherzogin. We want to be a free people under a free Grand Duchess." After this rally, Marie Adelheid did contain herself politically. However, the decision of Parliament to tackle the constitutional reform forced her to come back to the forefront. Actually, the Liberal deputies had introduced proposals for a change of the constitution that went far beyond the sole question of universal suffrage, in favor of which there was now a unanimity. I had explained yesterday that even the Catholics were in favor of universal suffrage. The most important proposal of the Liberals concerned monarchy directly. The sovereignty of the state that was attributed until then to the ruler was now to be shifted to the people. These articles were also declared revisable, but against the votes of most of the Catholics and against the will of the government of Leon Kaufmann, also a Catholic. The question provoked a governmental crisis, and the Minister of State Kaufmann was only deterred from resigning by a public statement of Marie Adelheid. In this statement, she agreed with the position of the government and the State Council that, quote, "all power emanates from the people," but declared the position of the government and the State Council was against this proposition that all power should emanate from the people, but she declared herself open to other formulations. In consequence, the government stayed in function and the elections for the Constituent Assembly could be organized. Seems to be a small problem here with PowerPoint. Okay. Through this statement, and this is now important for our subject of today, Marie Adelheid did not only save her government, but she also positioned herself concerning the introduction of universal suffrage. And I quote, "I myself," she says, "I myself am happy to know that I am in community of ideas with the representatives of the Luxembourgish people, and to find myself in the possibility, by joining the volition of the Parliament, to extend the exercise of political rights to thousands of fellow citizens who until today did not share them." To be sure, Marie Adelheid did not talk here of women's suffrage, but left this question as unspoken as did the parliamentarians. Nonetheless, she showed here that she was willing to accept the principle of political rights for the masses, which was rather astonishing for a monarch of that time and also compared to her own previous ruling style. This parliamentary crisis, in which the Grand Duchess or her councillors, we don't know that, showed a canny willingness to compromise for the first time, could have been the beginning of a turn for the better of the relations between her and the Parliament. But due to new scandals in relation with her German friendliness, this did not happen. Already from the summer 1918 onwards, Marie Adelheid's days as a Grand Duchess were counted. In September, Kaufmann resigned after having been attacked for assisting at a private visit of the German Chancellor Hertling to Marie Adelheid. I have explained yesterday how from the day of the armistice in November onwards, the throne of Marie Adelheid and more generally monarchy was hanging by a thread. It is now interesting to see how Marie Adelheid reacted to this danger. Already on the day of the armistice, the government declared that, I quote, in accordance with the Crown, the decision of the future organization of the Luxembourgish state will be put entirely into the hands of the Luxembourgish people. That meant implicitly that there would be a referendum. The idea behind this was twofold. On one hand, calm the revolutionary spirits outside the chamber by letting the citizens decide on the state form. On the other hand, the referendum was a form of showing to the world that Luxembourg wanted to be auto-determined and independent. Having belonged practically to the German camp during war, Luxembourg's fate was going to be decided by the Entente powers after war. The independence as a state of the small country was at stake. It was the time when the American President Woodrow Wilson defended the right to self-determination of the peoples in his 14 points program. And the referendum could be a way to express this will of self-determination on the Luxembourgish side. Even if it was most probably the Minister of State Emil Reuter who had the idea of the referendum, Marie Adelheid must have given her consent to this procedure, which could endanger monarchy. At the same time, she consented to give electoral rights to the people. Again, at this moment, women were not mentioned. But when Reuter defended the idea of the referendum in Parliament in the following days, he not only formulated that the Grand Duchess herself proposed this procedure, but he also explained that, I quote, "It belongs to all adult Luxembourgish citizens, men and women, if you like, to decide upon this question." Nobody in Parliament reacted to this hint, and it is possible that the deputies did not catch the meaning and the scope of these few words. The idea of the referendum was integrated in a parliamentary resolution that got a large support. In this resolution, Marie Adelheid was also invited to refrain from acts of sovereignty until the referendum. A week later, on 19th of November, Reuter introduced a corresponding bill project in which the participation of men and women in the referendum was explicitly mentioned. On the same day, he also read the answer of Marie Adelheid to the parliamentary resolution in which she invited the government to take at shortest term, quote, "the necessary measures to arrive to consult the Luxembourgish people in its entirety and on the largest base by way of the referendum." It is not known whether Marie Adelheid just followed the lead of Reuter or whether she actively supported his way of proceeding. In any case, she must have known what the idea behind accepting women's votes in the referendum was. As I said yesterday, this was a strategic move by Reuter. He thought he knew that women were going to vote for monarchy. But by this step, he also put pressure on the liberals and most of all the socialists to stick to their support of women's suffrage, and he prejudiced the outcome of the constitutional debate on women's political rights in the plenary that had not even begun. We can thus speculate on Marie Adelheid's support for women's suffrage. Was she in favor of it by principle? Did she also think strategically and hope that the throne could be saved that way? Or did she just leave this political decision to Reuter? Perhaps, but this is only a personal speculation, her upbringing in an all-female household and also her own role as a female ruler had opened her mind on this question. She did not position herself again until the second peak of the Republican movement in January 1919. In her letter of abdication, edited by Reuter himself, she emphasized again, quote, "At the moment when the end of the World War has placed Luxembourg before a new phase of its history, I have manifested my intention to put the destiny of the country into the hands of the Luxembourgish people. The exercise of this right, which is granted to even the smallest peoples by the new Charter of the League of Nations, will permit it to give its freely chosen institutions the solid base that results from the solidarity and the responsibility of all the citizens." Now we come to the fourth point, the referendum of 1919. With 77.8% of the valid votes, the referendum of 28th of September 1919 was a plebiscite for Grand Duchess Charlotte and strengthened the position of monarchy. Many contemporaries and even later historians thought that this was due to the strategy of giving the vote to women. There is, however, no possibility to prove this, since the vote was secret. One also has to be aware that among the new voters, there were not only workers sought to vote for the left, but also many electors from the rural world supposed to vote conservatively. The question has also been raised whether the reign of the first female monarch since many centuries had an influence on the debate about women's suffrage. If it had, it was surely not a positive one. Already in 1912, when Marie Adelheid refused to sign the new, more liberal school law bill, there were commentaries in the press saying that now one could see that a woman could not occupy the throne. So I come to my conclusion. I would like to sum up that during the reign of Marie Adelheid, monarchy went through a fundamental change. Confronted with the growing pressure of legitimation by political elections, the traditional form of governing had to be reinvented at the risk of disappearing entirely. The Grand Duchess took some time to accept this challenge and to find or support answers to it. When she finally spoke out her acceptance of universal suffrage, she opened the way to a constitutional reform that also made possible women's suffrage, but that did not guarantee it in its beginning. Luxembourg, by this step, in which Emil Reuter played a central role, could present itself to the world as a modern and most democratic state at a moment when the independence of the small state was strongly questioned on the level of international politics. We can thus say that Marie Adelheid, in favoring or agreeing to women's votes for the referendum, accepted a modernization of the state form that saved monarchy, even if it came too late to save her. Through this, she also indirectly helped to make women's political participation acceptable for many conservatives who would not have taken this claim seriously only some years before. And I thank you for listening, and I would be happy to hear your questions.
Thank you so much for sticking around and finishing things up. And again, I'm so sorry that there were some technical difficulties.
You know, it's like that with with virtual conferences. It's normal.
Yes, yes. Well, we power through. We power on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I believe, let's see. To switch gears a little bit, one of the questions that I think we left off on and may not have completely answered was about Grand Duchess Marie Adelheid's gender and how that may have had a negative impact on the debate on women's suffrage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I had already said during the talk that directly there was this criticism, and even before she became a Grand Duchess, there was this. This was put forward especially by the liberals, but also by socialist deputies, that a woman was not fit to do that job, and especially a young woman like her, because I had also tried to say before that indeed she was very young when she started, 18 years, and even men, I'm sure, would have been criticized for that if they had, let's say, been ruled in the style that Marie Adelheid did. But this gender thing, I think it comes back to what I said yesterday. The role of women was not seen like that, and even by liberals. So it was not that astonishing that that they came with this criticism. It was really the view many men had of women at that time, and so when things got bad, it was directly one of the arguments against her, and it stayed like that until the end.
Okay. And all right, so the next question we have is, were there other advancements in legal or economic life for women, or was it just focused on voting rights? Sorry if you already discussed this in the...
Yes, no problem. I can dwell on it again. In fact, women, like men, also thought that when the universal suffrage would come, this would solve a lot of other problems at the same time. So the universal suffrage was a kind of symbol for becoming equal now, and especially for women too. And then the developments showed that it did not go that way, because political rights, perhaps it was also because they had not been fought for, but because it was in a large part a strategic decision. They did not mean at the same time equality in other sectors of societal life. And I spoke yesterday about civil rights of women, especially married women, and that it took still more than 50 years after they got the political rights. So you can see that the idea of equality was not really put in place.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next question I have is from Carson. Could you briefly also discuss Marie Adelheid's exile in public life or influence on her country after her abdication?
In fact, she really retired from public life, and she went away. I don't know if that is known that well, but directly after her abdication, she went to southern Germany, and then to Italy, and she tried to become a nun, but this did not work out. So I think she tried twice even, and this was also a question. She chose how do you call that, monasteries or congregations that were very strict, and one gets the impression that she really wanted to test herself, or to be very strict to herself, and that led also for a large part to her becoming ill. We know that she died very young, at the age of 29, and so there are many interpretations of this time afterwards, but one gets the impression that she really was not a happy woman anymore. However, she was still in contact with her family, and there are also photographs from afterwards. I think she still had a good relationship to her other sisters and also to Charlotte. One thing I did not mention all the time is that she had already said when she was very young that she did not want to marry, and that also was a problem for being a Grand Duchess. So her idea was already that she would one day abdicate in favor of Charlotte.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. Oh, that puts an interesting light on everything then. Definitely interesting.
Yeah, I think it was in relation also to her very strong religiousness at that time, and that was perhaps the reason why she didn't want to marry. But anyway, afterwards too, she stayed a single woman, if you want to.
Okay, interesting. Well, now let's see. Okay. I know that you pointed out the book in your presentation that was just recently published about Marie Adelheid, and I was wondering if there are any other resources that somebody might look to if they want to learn more about her and her time as the Grand Duchess.
Yes, that is an interesting question, because there have been books or articles about Marie Adelheid, but the difficulty was until now, and it is still, that the archives of the Grand Ducal Court are not open to the public, and so even now this new biography, Josiane Weber did not have access to new sources that might be there. We don't know that. But Josiane Weber's book is also a kind of new look on Marie Adelheid, because before the Grand Duchess was always depicted as a young, beautiful woman who was very badly influenced, and fate did not mean well with her. And Josiane Weber, she has a totally different view. So if you want to look for sources, Josiane Weber will show you that it was a woman who took decisions and had to stand up for them. And the older sources, they would rather say that it was a young woman who was influenced by other people. But there are several books or articles you can find also virtually on in the catalog of the National Library in Luxembourg. So that would be the site a-z.lu.
Perfect. Okay. All right. And then also going back to your presentation, what was the school referendum she did not want to sign?
Oh, it was not a referendum, it was a bill. Yes, in fact, I had spoken yesterday about the situation of women in education, but generally there was a strong influence of the church on education. And in the beginning of the 20th century, the liberals and socialist deputies had a strong stand in parliament, and they wanted to change this. They wanted to bring through a law through which education would become more neutral, if you want, and free from the influence of the church. And this led to a big debate, and also really to conflicts, because the bishop was against that, and he also wanted to, well, he could not excommunicate people, but he really said that these people were very bad people, these deputies. So there was really a confrontation in Luxembourgish society about that. And Marie Adelheid really engaged herself for the side of the church and of the Catholic deputies. So she refused to sign the bill, which she had to do, in fact, because it was written in Constitution. The Grand Duke or Duchess has to sign the bills. And in that way, she could block the parliamentary system.
Okay. All right. And this next question is sort of, you already answered this question, but while we were having technical difficulties, so I'm sorry, gonna ask you to say it again. But how was Marie Adelheid influenced by outside countries, Germany, Belgium, France, as well as was she criticized by other monarchs?
Mm-hmm. Yes. In fact, I have spoken about Marie Adelheid's German friendliness, and she had many links to Germany, also to the Kaiser. And he was informed about the developments in Luxembourg and also about her decisions. And he was not in every point agreeing with her, but generally he was very much against the liberals and the socialists in the Luxembourgish parliament. And he also thought that since Luxembourg was occupied by Germany, Germany had the say, and anyhow it was mostly thought that after the war Luxembourg would become German. And on the other side, France and Belgium, they took the attitude of Marie Adelheid very badly, and it was one of the reasons why they did not want to help Luxembourg anymore. For instance, Luxembourg had this problem of hunger and of not having enough food, and tried to get food on the international market, and they tried to block that. And also after the war had ended, the Entente powers were for some time not agreeing on that Luxembourg should stay an independent country. So, and in this situation, Belgium tried to annex Luxembourg, which did not succeed.
Right, right. Okay. The next question I have is more for you personally. What got you interested, and I know you talked briefly about this yesterday, but I guess what got you interested in this history?
Yes, well, it's a little bit different because I did not work so much on Marie Adelheid until a certain moment when I was asked to do a talk on her and Charlotte and develop the differences in the images, in the public images in Luxembourg on these two sisters, because Adelheid, still today there are people who really worship her, and I forgot to say that there was a movement in the 1930s to now I don't find the right words, but to make her holy, if you know what I mean.
Oh, to make her a saint?
Yes. It did not succeed. But most of the people were not so happy with Marie Adelheid because of her German friendliness. This stayed in the memory, in the public memory. And Charlotte, she was a very different personality. She was very open and extroverted. She was a family woman. She had many children, and she retained from trying to influence politics. That was perhaps also a lesson she had learned. And most of all, Charlotte played a very important role in World War II as a symbol for Luxembourgish independence. And she was very active in the USA, as you surely know, tried to put Luxembourg on the map and to try to convince politicians that this was important. So that was a little bit the start of my interest for Marie Adelheid. And for me, it was also very important when I read the books on her or the articles, how she was presented, because she was really, it was really a very, you could say, chauvinist attitude towards her. She was not taken seriously also by the historians. So it was always about her beauty, about her being young, and not about what she wanted to do as a ruler, and also her faults and so on. So I got the impression that she deserved more than that, and that's why I got more and more interested in her.
Okay, great. Well, that wraps it up for us. And again, thank you so much for joining back to answer these questions.
I was happy to be able to answer the question, and it was really a big pleasure for me to join the conference.
Oh, well, and thank you so much. We really appreciate your perspective as well as your presentations, and thank you so much for joining our conference.